1995. The survivor is Alan Feld, F-E-L-D. The interviewer is Kathy Epstein, E-P-S-T-I-E-N. The interview is taking place in Lauderhill in the Miami, Florida District, USA. This will be roll number 1.
Today's date is September 8th, 1995. Survivor is Alan Feld, A-L-L-A-N, F-E-L-D, and my name is Kathy Epstein, C-A-T-H-Y-E-P-S-T-I-E-N. We are in Lauderhill, Florida, in the United States of America. The language is English. Could you please tell me your full name?
My name is Alan Feld.
And was that your name at birth?
Yes.
Were you known by any other names growing up?
No.
When were you born?
June the 14th, 1919.
Which makes you how old today?
76.
Okay. And where were you born?
Lodz, Poland.
Tell me a little bit about your parents and your family.
Well, I am the older of two. I had a younger brother who was 3 years younger than I. My parents, I would say, they were a little bit ahead of their time, because I heard them sometimes discuss with their peers that they didn't want to have any more children than 2 in order to give them more than if they had more children. I grew up in the, I would say, poor part of the city, because the majority, I would say 90 or 95% of the people were working people. My father was a weaver, and so was, and my mother was also in the same textile industry, since Lodz, Poland is the second largest industrial center of textile in Europe. So I grew up in relatively good atmosphere because I had very loving and devoted parents. As a matter of fact, I can remember times when my father and mother sacrificed their own needs in order to give us, my brother and I, the basic necessities which we required. As a matter of fact, I can remember when my mother used to go to work, I had a carte blanche with my brother to go into a candy store to have candy or soda or ice cream, or when to go to have a Danish, which other kids, my peers, didn't have. So I would say I grew up in a very close and loving relationship with my parents. They were very, very devoted to each other.
What were your parents' names?
My father's name was Moses, and my mother's name was Rachel.
And what was her maiden name?
Rosenzweig.
And what was your brother's name?
Solomon.
Growing up in Lodz, what was your schooling?
I went to public school as far as junior high, because if you wanted to go further, you had to pay for it. Until junior high, the government was paying for it. It was compulsory. And I went to school until I reached the age of 14. After I reached the age of 14, I went to learn a trade. And the reason I went to learn a trade is because being a young boy, I felt the hopelessness already being in Poland, especially for the Jewish people, because there was very big discrimination. And the situation was such that the schools, even when I went to school, the school was segregated. In our city, Jewish boys went to separate schools, and Polish boys went to separate schools. It was segregated. As a matter of fact, there was not even co-educational, the Jewish schools. The Polish schools were co-ed. So I can remember when we went to school and we went to chemical, we had the chemistry, and we didn't have the laboratories. We used to go to the Polish school where they had the laboratories, and the Polish boys and girls used to throw stones at us and call us names. And at that time already I felt the anti-Semitism, deep-rooted anti-Semitism. As a matter of fact, even when they went out from church on a Sunday and you went by and you looked Jewish or whatever, you had a chance to be beaten up. As another way was, let's say, if there was a funeral procession, they were carrying a cross, and whoever, Jews or non-Jews, whoever didn't, especially Jews, he didn't take off his hat, he was beaten up. So I recognized already the anti-Semitism which was prevalent in Poland.
Were there any incidences of anti-Semitism that you recall that happened to you directly?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was about, I would say, 18. I was going with a friend of mine, and behind us there were two students. They recognized two students because they went with a uniform, special uniforms. And they were talking behind us. It says, one said, "They're not Jewish." The other said, "Yeah, they are Jewish." And my friend turned around, and they recognized them as Jewish. They started chasing us and tried to beat us up. And especially there was the so-called National Democratic Party, which was a Nazi party in Poland. And they had a publication, and they're spewing anti-Semitism. And as a matter of fact, I can remember when I got older that even in the so-called House of Representatives, there was one woman who was an MP, member of Parliament. She wanted to do away with the kosher ritual slaughter of animals for the Jewish consumption. In the meantime, but they embraced the ideology of Nazism in Poland, and it was very, very, very anti-Semitic. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to go into, first of all, if you were Jewish, if you wanted to go into higher learning, you had segregated seating. The Jews were seated in the back separately. They couldn't mix with the Poles. And it was a very, very pitiable situation for the Poles. It was hopeless. I can remember the Polish radio, which was owned by the state, was teaching the Poles how to push out the Jews from the marketplace. And they said, and they were teaching them how to boycott Jewish establishments.
And this was over the radio?
This was over the Polish radio.
Did your family or did you have any dealings with Gentiles in your town?
No. I'll tell you why. Because first of all, it was a big, big city. It was a city almost 700,000 with a population of 200,000 Jews. We were not accepted socially or otherwise. We didn't have any connection with any non-Jews.
What was your religious background, training?
I did not have any. I was brought up as a secular Jew. I didn't go to any Jewish cheder or whatever school.
Were you bar mitzvah?
No.
Was that unusual in Poland at the time?
It was. I would say it was a little bit unusual because my father had the same persuasion, although he received a very, he went to yeshiva, and he was educated religiously educated because my grandfather, which I knew, the only one, my father's father, he was a religious man, and he sent him to yeshiva, but he came out as a non-religious man, my father.
Were holidays ever celebrated in your house?
He did go to shul, but my mother used to make the traditional meals when it came to the holidays. But observed the holidays as going to shul. My father was never a member of a shul.
Do you recall how you did celebrate any of the traditional holidays at home?
Well, we had, let's say, a Passover. My mother used to buy matzahs because we liked them. But if I had bread also. So it was not strict kosher. My mother, when she bought meat, she didn't go to a kosher establishment. She bought meat non-kosher.
And as I asked before, this was not traditionally the norm.
Or was
there a whole movement?
There was a movement because my father, he was a socialist. Although he was not a member of a party, but he was a sympathizer with the Bund, like in America, which was published the Volkszeitung or whatever. So he embraced this persuasion, and he was not religious, and neither was my mother. And this for a reason, because my father used to, we had a very close relationship with my father, and he told me the stories how before the movement started in Poland, how the people were like chattel, working for the buses until 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they were sleeping there, you know, like they were slaves. And they came the I would call it the period of enlightening, when the movement started, and started even when this part of Poland was occupied by the Russians, because Poland was occupied for over 130 years by three major powers: Russia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Germany. Our part of Poland, which is central part, about 80 miles southwest of Warsaw, was occupied by the Russians. And at that time there was a movement because the Poles wanted to defeat, the Russians, they wanted to carve out their own independence, their own country. So this movement started as a part of a movement against Russia. And a lot of people embraced it.
Growing up, did you consider yourself more of a Pole or a Jew?
No, a Jew. Because we, as I said before, we were not socially accepted. And besides, although I was not a religious person, but we derived pride from our heritage. And we looked down upon the Poles because they were not so, I would say, blue-white, because they were mostly, what I've seen, drunkards. When they came home with a pay, they left half of the pay in the saloon, and they came home with a half a pay. They beat up their wives, drunk, and we looked down upon them. So we did not identify as Poles, because we lived on a higher moral standard than the Poles.
Prior to 1939, had your parents ever spoken about ever leaving Poland?
You see, it's a very interesting question, because I can remember that the fervent wish of all the Jews was to leave. As I remember, if I remember correctly, in 1937, there was a movement, and this was spurred by Russia, to give part of the Far East, which borders on China, a territory which is called Azerbaijan. They wanted to counter the Zionist movement, and they said that they would like to establish a Jewish republic. In the thousands upon thousands of Jews registered for that kind of adventure, but it never came to be. As a matter of fact, even in Poland there was a movement which called the Independent Socialist Territorialists, and the leader was in Warsaw, Dr. Kruk, his name was, and he wanted to establish a Jewish land in Uganda or in Madagascar, which was they wanted to influence the English Parliament, English government, to carve out a piece of territory for a Jewish settlement. So the question of going somewhere else was on the minds of almost everybody, but the funds were not there, and we couldn't go away. We couldn't because we didn't have the money to go, and nobody would accept us. Where would you go?
What do you remember about the day that the war broke out? Do you remember where you were?
Yes, yes. The war broke out. I remember I was at home, and I've seen the German Luftwaffe, the airplanes cruising around very high in the sky, and I don't know whether it was a hoax or not, but 2 days later, or a day later, or 2 days later, there was supposedly, I didn't hear it myself, but I was told there was an announcement from the Polish government that every able-bodied man should converge on Warsaw to defend Polish capital. I, being at the age of 20 at that time, with a few friends and neighbors, converged on Warsaw by foot. It was 80 miles. It took us about 4 days. We walked day and night. And what I can tell you is the overkill, what I have experienced over there, is beyond imagination. It's sometimes haunting me because I could see at one point, I saw a young little boy who had on this Boy Scout uniform with his open eyes. He was a Polish national. And he had just here bullet, and he was dead, a little boy. And the overkill was unbelievable. And they used to come down, the German Luftwaffe came down from the treetop and sprayed us with machine guns. And they bombed every little house, even 2-3 miles away from the main road. Everything was burning. After 4 days, I came into Warsaw, and Warsaw was bombarded day and night. One wave went, one wave came. One wave went, one wave came, and on top of it was artillery. And to give you an example, and I have to go back to the anti-Semitic question. To give you an example, I was once building at night. It was total blackout. We were building anti-tank ditches and barricades against the Germans.
This was in Warsaw.
Yeah. And Warsaw was bombarded even at night. The police who directed us, kept us working, were chiding with us. Hey, Jew boys, he said. They had the Germans on their throat. They still had, hey, Jew boys, when are you going to go to Palestine and shoot the Arabs from behind the wall with bent rifles? Can you imagine that? It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So how long did you spend in Warsaw?
2 weeks. After it was total carnage. After 2 weeks.
While you were in Warsaw with these
Yes.
other boys, where were you staying, just sleeping on?
We were sleeping on the ground. We were sleeping in a there was the street, I remember the street, Twarda 4. There was a synagogue in the back, and there was a Jewish school, a tall building, a Jewish school, and we were sleeping wherever you could take place, on the stairs, on the floor, and that's what it was. After 2 weeks, there was a hoax because Warsaw was overflowing with refugees, and the military said that the Polish army got back Lodz, and those people who are from Lodz should go back. So the friends and neighbors who went together with me tried to go back. About 10, 12 miles out of Warsaw, we see tanks. We thought this is a Polish tanks. Germans. Luckily enough, the entire stretch from Warsaw back to Lodz, we were not taken into prison or nothing. We went straight home. But we had a curfew, of course, at 5 o'clock in the evening. We had to go and seek some shelter because we're not allowed to. And we started to hearing the horror stories from the people that were into a village or a little town that I can remember one woman, she had a farmer's wife. She said that she's afraid to let in a few people into the barn because when the Germans came, they took all the men into a barn, sprayed it with gasoline, and burned them alive. There was a Polish farmer.
When you got back to Lodz, what was the condition of your home and your
Well,
town?
The lodge was not bombarded for the simple reason because there was a large community of Germans, Polish Germans, Poles of German extraction. So they did not bombard lodge. Only one bomb fell on lodge, and that's it. But when I came, they were on the marketplace. 10 people were hanging on the marketplace for several days. The Germans executed them in order to make the people, to subdue the people with panic.
Did you know the reason these people were?
They took, just like they took those farmers and killed them, because this was the way they operated. For instance, when they came into a town, the first thing what they did is they took all the political leaders, all the union leaders, all the clergy, rabbis or priests or whatever, they took them away. And then the people were without leaders, and they're vulnerable. And on top of it, when they took people and executed them without any reason, then they had them there in the palms of the hand. People were panicked. They were scared. Scared stiff.
So how did your life change when you went back home? The Germans left Lodz.
No, they didn't leave Lodz. They established Lodz. The change for this part that they started rationing everything.
So they had set up a military base?
In Lodz?
Yes.
Yeah. This was, and then Lodz was incorporated in the Third Reich. And it changed the name from Lodz to Litzmannstadt. They incorporated then. So the first winter was, with our luck, it was very cold winter. The rations became smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the year 1940, May 1940, they carved out a ghetto, and all the people, the Jews who lived outside of this area, had to leave everything behind them and move into the ghetto. And the situation was very, very overcrowded.
Describe the layout of the ghetto, how it was enclosed.
The ghetto was established in the area where there was the slum area, the poorest and the most densely populated area. For instance, I was born there and I lived there in the same apartment. For instance, 4 people lived in a cubicle less than this here. Okay? There was the bedroom and the dining room and the kitchen, everything in the same thing. Now, when the people moved in from the outside, those people who lived in bigger rooms or in 2 rooms had to take in a family. So it was very, very congested. And the hygienic situation had a lot to be desired. It was, people started getting sick. A lot of people, I can remember very well that people started getting sick of dysentery and tuberculosis, malnutrition.
Do you have any idea of how many people were living in the ghetto at this time?
Yes, according to the books that I read, there was 160,000, 160 or 180,000. In a very small area, I would say, they say, if I remember correctly, it was 4 square miles.
Describe the rationing that you spoke about.
The rationing in the beginning was a little bit more, and then it got less and less and less and less. Too much. Too little to live and too much to die.
Tell me what a normal...
For instance, a 4-pound bread in the beginning had to last you for a week, per person. And then a little bit potatoes. But as time progressed, it became less and less and less. And people started getting swollen feet and started dying of malnutrition in exposure to the elements, because there was no enough fuel because we didn't have electricity or central air because whatever we heated our apartments were with coal and wood. So it was very, very, a very, very bad situation.
And you were with your parents and your brother
Yes.
at the time?
Yes.
Did you have any other family?
I had an extended family. I had my mother's two sisters lived in the same apartment building. I had an uncle who lived a couple of blocks away from us, and I had cousins in extended family, second cousins, but they all disappeared. They all disappeared. They all died.
An average day in the ghetto. What did you work at all?
Yes, I did. I did. You had to, because in the beginning, before they established the ghetto, first of all, I have to give you the conditions. When we moved into the ghetto, we were completely, but completely cut off from the outside world. Completely. No mail, no radio, no letters, no newspapers, nothing. Completely cut off. And we didn't know what's going on outside the ghetto. Not at all. Now, in the beginning, we didn't do anything, but they established shops of any imaginable profession which you can think of, starting with tailoring, and carpentry, and shoemaking, in whatever you can think of. Even they used to do parts in parts for the defense, for armor. With armor. This was. Pardon me?
And what did you do?
I was working in making uniforms for the soldiers, uniforms and civilian clothes, because I'm by profession a men's custom tailor.
Now, did you have to work to receive your rations, or that was just...
No, you didn't have to work, but you wanted to better yourself, because those people who didn't work were subject of leaving the ghetto, because the Germans every once in a while demanded a certain amount of people. And those people who were not productive we didn't know at that time, because it was hard to believe, but those people who were not productive were taken out little by little and destroyed.
Rule number 2.
Mr. Feld, you were speaking about the people in the ghetto that were non-productive. They were taken away. This was a form of selections, correct?
Yes, at that time, yes, but we didn't know about it.
Do you remember any particular time that you saw people being taken away?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I remember this was the most tragic chapter in the Jewish history. This was September 5th, 1942. It was a general curfew. The Germans made a demand that the leadership of the ghetto should give up the children and the old people and the sick. Since the leadership didn't want to do it, the Germans themselves, with the help of the Jewish police, went from building to building, from street to street, from house to house, and they rounded up the children, the old people, and cleaned out all the hospitals and took them away. This left on me an indelible mark, because I could see children from my building where I lived with their innocent eyes loaded on a truck and taken away. Can anybody understand the anguish and the pain of parents when their children are taken away? I doubt it. I've seen a man split his head against the house when his child was taken away. And people in our building where I lived, one woman committed suicide because she couldn't take it.
There any attempts that you knew of to hide the children?
There was. As a matter of fact, one man hid his child in our building. He did. But so he had prolonged a few months later. The inevitable.
Your family was left intact still at this
My
point?
family was left intact because my father at that time was 24, 42, he was exactly 50. My mother was 50. But my girlfriend, my wife, which is my wife now, her mother was taken away because she was prematurely gray. And I couldn't face her for 2 weeks that her mother was taken away.
And at this time, did you all have any idea where they were going?
Well, I'll tell you, no, we didn't. I'll tell you, I guess this is innate in human nature, that you don't want to believe the bad and you want to believe the good. So, as I said before, we were completely cut from the outside world, completely cut off from the outside world. And we didn't know. As a matter of fact, I can remember in 1944, I had a friend, and he belonged to the revisionist party. It's the Zionist party. This was he had belonged to an organization in the ghetto which was illegal, was covered. And he came to me. He was working with me together in the factory, and he said to me, "Do you know something? There is a place, Auschwitz, and they are sending over there Jews from Hungary, and they burning them, they're killing them." And I figured this must be propaganda. This is not true. This is not true. And I can remember in 1944, only 7 months later, when I was taken with my wife at that time, I was married already at that time, as they liquidated the ghetto, and I was taken to the train depot, loaded on cattle cars, traveling after a whole night. And when I looked out the window and the train stopped, and I saw Auschwitz, it came back to me, and I said to my wife, "This is the end."
You just mentioned that you got married in the ghetto.
Yes.
So life went on. You worked.
I'll tell you. I worked. I'll tell you.
And then,
I'll tell you what it was. The life in ghetto. We tried to make our life as pleasant as possible. For instance, there were concerts, music, and opera, singers, local people. And at night, since we had a curfew until 5 o'clock, and we were young, we had literary groups, with reading and this and that. We tried to make our life as pleasant as possible. This was going on because we didn't have any choice. We did not have any choice. Besides, maybe it's innate in us to look for something better in life. Maybe we didn't want to face the truth because we couldn't even change it. Because we were completely cut off. And the outside population, the local population, the Poles, completely did not cooperate.
did you ever know of any attempts to escape the ghetto?
You couldn't. You couldn't. Because if you stuck out your nose after 5 o'clock, even going in the middle of the day, there were some sentries who, just for the fun of it, shot you.
These were Polish guards?
No, these were Germans. Germans, just for the fun of it.
So there was nothing that
No.
you knew that could be brought
You
in,
couldn't escape.
and no food
Couldn't
brought in
escape.
from
You couldn't.
outside?
No. No.
You said you got married in the ghetto. Did you have a wedding?
No. It was performed like a civil ceremony. The reason I got married was this. My wife, as I said before, her father died of tuberculosis. In the beginning, I think it was 1941. In 1942, when it was the general cleansing of the ghetto, like they said, cleansing, they took away the old people, and they took away my wife's mother, she was by herself. So at that time, she was my girlfriend, and my mother had a very good rapport with her. So she says, she's alone, let her move in. Okay, so she moved in fast. Then it was in 1944, before the general liquidation of the ghetto, they made again a demand that people 40 and over, 50, should be delivered to the Germans. So my mother and father were delivered to the Germans. So in those days, it's not like today. You live with a girl, you don't live with a, so got married. I got married by the leader of the ghetto, Rumkowski. And it was a group wedding of maybe 10, 15, or 20 couples, and it was like a civil ceremony. Now, after a week, they changed their plans. They released my mother and father, and I was in heaven because I was devoted to my mother and father. I worshipped them. And I was going to pieces when they took them away.
You said they held them for a week.
Yes.
Where?
They held them in an enclosure. They wanted to make a group and then send them away. So when they came back, I thought I was reborn again, And after 4 weeks, the liquidation of the ghetto happened. And I went to Auschwitz practically on my honeymoon. And my father and mother stayed because they liquidated the ghetto according where you work. I worked in a factory where they made uniforms. This one had to go the first. So we went the first.
Was there any pre-warning?
It was a systematic, you see, it was systematic, because they had very good advice from psychiatrists how to brainwash people, how to deceive people, and they made it very systematic. And as a matter of fact, I can remember when I was on the train depot, all our tools were right on the train depot. And they said, you see, you going, and this goes after you. And we believed them. They said, you're too valuable to us because the Russians are encroaching upon us from the east. We need you in Germany. We're going to resettle you in Germany. And we believed them because the tools, everything was on the depot. And when you got into the cars, everything was fine. You got a loaf of bread, you got this and that, and you wound up out of the Auschwitz.
The day you left the ghetto, what do you remember, your feelings, or what do you remember about that day?
I'll tell you what I remember. This is, I remember my mother took me to the trolley car because we had to go with a trolley car. And as I was standing in the back for a trolley car, and my mother faded away further and further and further, I said to my wife, this is the last time I see my mother.
And did you ever see them again?
No. My father is. My father survived.
Did your mother say anything to you before you left?
No, she cried.
Do you remember what you took with you? Were you allowed to take any personal effects?
Yes, pictures and this and that, but when you came there, they terrorized you with start screaming, schnell, 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 and you left everything, and then the selection here, but you didn't know where you were going, whether he is good or he is bad. You didn't know. It was just like cattle.
So you were put on these trains, and you were given rations at the time?
Yeah, we got a loaf of bread, whatever.
And how long were you on the train?
Overnight.
And when you arrived in Auschwitz, what do you remember seeing? What do you remember about that day?
I remember that day, total dehumanization. You went there, they shaved your hair, body hair, they took off your clothes, you got into a shower, and they gave you striped clothing. You became a number. And I'm going to tell you something. I was, in a way, I was lucky. I got after I was assigned to a block. This man was a Polish guy. He was a soccer player. So the first thing after the roll call, he says, "Who can sing?" Somebody got out. "Who can play an instrument?" Another guy got out. So he says, "Who can draw?" I said, "I can draw." Fine. When you finish, I'm going to show you a drawing. But anyway, so took me in his quarter. It was fenced off with he showed me a picture of his son.
This was a German officer?
No, this was a Pole.
Pole.
He was also a inmate, but he had special privileges because he was not Jewish, he was Polish. So he showed me a picture of his son, little son. So he said, "Can you make this here for me?" I said, "Yes." So he gave me paper and gave me material, and he went out. This was after roll call. Everybody was already in his place, like sardines, one by one. So I was sitting there, about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was finished. He comes in. He was dead drunk with his cronies. Came in, and I gave him the picture. And they all said, "He looks just like you," his friends. And from then on, I was in his graces. So when the next day after roll call, I went over to him and I said to him, "Where are those people that came with me and I don't see them?" You know what he told me? He said, "You see the smoke over there? They went right to heaven with the smoke." So I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They were gassed and burned." So I said to him, "Listen, you're my friend. What shall I do?" He said to me, "Get out of here as soon as you can." I asked him, "How can I get out?" So he said, "Listen, they're going to come here from Germany, people, ask for people with a special profession. Whatever profession they ask for, whether a plumber or whatever, say you're a plumber, say you are whatever they ask for. This way to get out of here." And I did so. But this is not the end. Now, after 2 weeks, comes a commission, civilians, and they ask, who is a plumber? Everybody went over there, whoever it was. I said, "I'm a plumber." And I was assigned to go to Germany. Okay? I was happy. Get out of the place where they burn people. As luck wants it, a day or 2 days after that, after roll call, and I'm standing outside, I see my father. Marching with the new arrivals. I was in block 8, he was in block 20. After they settled there, I went over. And I said to my father, "What are you doing?" He said, "Where's Mother?" He doesn't know. Mother went on the other side. She was in Auschwitz, she lost her life. So next to my father was a friend of his. So he says, I said to my father, "I am already committed to go to Germany to work." So this friend heard me. So he said, "Suppose I go in your place." He was older than I. "Suppose I go in your place and you go with your father." I said, "Fine." I went to the guy who was in the graces with him, the Pole, and I said to him, "I'm going to exchange places." He said, "Okay, I don't care." So I gave him my number, and my name, and I went with my father.
You were not tattooed?
No, because if I would work in Poland, I would be tattooed, but not in Germany. They didn't have time. I was in line already for tattooing, but I didn't. Anyway, so I went with my father. So I wound up together with my father in Germany in the same camp. And the other guy, never heard of him.
I want to go back a little bit. When you first arrived in Auschwitz, you were with your wife?
Yes, but they were separated.
When you got off of the wagon,
Yes.
what happened exactly? Was there a selection made
Yes.
then?
Yes.
Tell me about the selection, and do you remember who was making it?
Mengele made it, sure.
What do you remember about that?
Very, very hazy. Completely overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed. I didn't know, like I said before, which way is good, which way is bad. He told me to go this way, I went this way. I didn't know. Nobody knew. It was sheer luck. As a matter of fact, the only thing what I can tell you is this. If somebody could be young, 25, 30, if he was bold, he went to the oven. Tell you a little story. A friend of mine lived in the same street as I did. He was my age, and I was at that time 25. In 1944, I was 25 years old. When we went to Germany, my father and I, in a different transport. We had to go again, taking showers, and we had to wait for our clothing. It was deloused, completely naked, milled around. This SS man with a crop was looking around and looking around, looking around, looking around. He spotted my friend. This was already after the selection that he is eligible to go to work. We were all skinny, you know, but his friend, my friend, he was not he didn't have a hunchback. Otherwise he would have gone right away to the gas chamber. But one blade was protruding a little bit. One blade, and the shoulder blade, was protruding a little bit. The man said to him, "Come here." He went with him away. We never saw him again. You had to be completely without a blemish. Otherwise, they had a pretext right away to kill you.
So when you changed places with this man,
Yes.
and went with your father, it was Block 20, you said?
Yes.
What happened then? What?
They went away before us. We had to wait another 2 weeks until somebody else came and took this block and whatever to Germany. And we wound up in the vicinity of Landsberg, outside of Landsberg. And
Tell me what life was like in Auschwitz at that time.
well, you had to go out early morning on a roll call. It was very cold because it's near the Carpathian Mountains. It was cold.
What time of year? Do you remember the
was,
date?
Yeah, this was already in the beginning, July, the beginning of September. July, the end of July, it was already cold, very cold. And as a matter of fact, it was a very dismal life. You, as I said before, complete dehumanization. As a matter of fact, I can remember when we had roll call and this assessment was going on in counting the people. If for no apparent reason, if he wanted to, he took you out, and you never saw you again. If he didn't like you for some reason, I had that policy. When he went by, I just stared like in space. I didn't want to make eye contact because eye contact was considered disrespectful. So I looked in space. This was my inner feeling. In some people, on several occasions, I've seen people go to the barbed wire, which was electrically charged, and committed suicide in Auschwitz.
Did anything happen to you personally in Auschwitz that you recall?
No. Except of the general dehumanization act. Otherwise, I didn't receive any beatings or whatever.
And your daily life there, describe a day.
In the morning, you got up, you stand in a roll call for about 2-3 hours. Then you got your food, and then...
What was the food?
The food was some kind of soup, you know, with potatoes. And, you got some bread, and that's about it. And then you had the roll call at night, and then you went to sleep.
Was there ever any discussions amongst the inmates?
No.
Did you have any idea what was going on in other parts
No,
of Germany or Poland?
no.
So there
we
was
didn't.
no news?
No, none whatsoever. And the only thing is, you know, when you become when you become dehumanized and you don't have the lack of food and everything, you get tunnel vision. The tunnel vision is how to get one day at a time to live another day, live another day, live another day. You become oblivious to everything else.
Tell me about the day that you left Auschwitz. What was the date and about
I
the
don't
time?
remember the date exactly, but it was in September. In September, I left Auschwitz. We traveled, I remember, through Czechoslovakia. Even we went through Vienna because we didn't have any water. They gave us again a piece of salami and bread, but no water. And wherever we stopped on a station, we begged the people to bring us water. It was a very, very uncomfortable thing because a lot of people were in the same car, maybe 100 or so people. We stripped because it was hot from no ventilation, anything. And I don't remember how many days we traveled, but we came to Kaufering, Landsberg, and this was a newly constructed camp. It was not even finished yet. And when we came there, there were the people the first one who came there were Jews from Greece, Greek Jews. And as a matter of fact, then I found out that those Greek Jews cleaned the ghetto in Warsaw.
Did you ever speak to them about that?
They were very clannish. They were very clannish, those Greeks. They had a complete different mentality. Complete different. If they wouldn't have told me they're Jewish, I wouldn't believe it. They have a complete different mentality, like the Polish Jews or even Hungarian Jews. They were completely different.
Did you find that the Jews from different countries tended to stay together?
Yes, definitely. I was with Jews from Lithuania, from Greece, and they were clannish, yes.
Describe this camp in Landsberg.
Well, the Landsberg camp consisted of barracks, which were just a roof over the ground, a gable, and then you had to walk down several steps, and then you had here 2 platforms on which people were living next to each other, laying down like sardines. And then you had to go to work. Also early in the morning, you had to go to work, and you had to, you were exposed to the elements.
What type of work did you do there?
I was working on the railroad, laying tracks, railroad tracks. Sometime I was working, making the water pipe ditches to water pipes. And the ground over there is very, very hard to dig because it's in Bavaria. It's it is rock. Rocky.
And what did your father do?
My father worked in a place where they made the parts of airplanes.
So was this a large camp?
It was a large camp. I'll tell you, we went in from our city. We went in 3,000 men from our city, And I would say there were another tower, about 4,000 in one camp. As a matter of fact, 3,000 men went in and out within a few months. From September till March, 100 went out, march out from 3,000.
Only 100 survived that camp from 3,000.
Yes.
Was your father one of them?
I was separated after a while from my father, and I didn't know whether my father is alive. I found out that my father is alive after the war ended.
So there were was there a selection
No.
at this camp?
No, the only time people were taken away is if they got sick. If they got sick, then they were taken away to Auschwitz for destruction.
So when were you separated from your father?
Because they separated from my father. I don't know how it happened, why, but they caught you sometime unexpected on a place where you had the roll call. They cut off this here and take you away, not because of any reason. Just cut off this column and took you away, out of the place.
We were talking about the day that you were separated from your father during a roll call. Did you get to speak to your father again?
No, not after I met him after the war.
So the day of the roll call, you were separated and you weren't even able to say goodbye?
No.
Did you know where they sent him?
He stayed there. They didn't send him anyway. They sent me away.
Okay, where did you go?
I went a few kilometers to another camp. This was camp number 4, and I went to camp number 7.
Now, were these sub-camps of a large...
Same size.
Okay.
Same size and same build, everything the same.
And how far away was that?
This was about 4 or 5 miles away, kilometers rather.
And they walked you there?
Oh yeah.
And what did you do? The new camp, did you have...
Same work. Same work.
And was the layout of the camp the same?
Same thing. Everything the same thing.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, there's a story that goes like this. I went there, it was in November, I got sick. I suffered from dysentery, and I had my toes already frozen because this was in the Bavarian Alps, and it was snow and frost, and I couldn't walk anymore.
What were you wearing on your... Describe what you were wearing.
What I was wearing? Well, sometime I wore, schmattes, and sometime whatever I could lay hands on. Sometime I used to wear those, what do you call the Holland, the
Wooden shoes?
wooden shoes, and it was very cold. You didn't have any protection, and I was working outside the elements. Played a very devastating role on you, and I had frozen toes, and it was with what do you call pus, and I was a mess. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk. I was completely sick, so I figured this is the end. And I knew that if I'm not going to go out to roll call and go to work, a day or two, they're going to come from Dachau and take me away. But I couldn't do it anymore, so I remained and I didn't go to roll call. Well, I don't know. I was lucky. I didn't go to roll call. All of a sudden, after roll call is over, I hear a commotion outside. And all the people on the block come back in. I said, what happened? I said, there is a epidemic of typhus, and they don't let us out because they are afraid that we are going to infect them, the Germans, with typhus. So they put the camp under quarantine, and it lasted from November until the end of March. No, the middle of March. Until the middle of March. At that time, just by doing nothing, no medical attention, no nothing, just laying at one spot, I felt that I am getting stronger. And I put a piece of paper on that wound, on the toes, and one day I wanted to take a look how it is after maybe two months, and I took away the paper, and everything underneath was healed. New skin, clean. The rest was dirty, but this new skin was clean. And this quarantine saved me, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
During this quarantine, was anyone expected to work?
No, because they were afraid that because, you see, the carrier of typhus are lice, and the entire camp was crawling with it. So they were afraid, the Germans, that we are going to infect them with it. So they put it in quarantine. But a lot of people died. I remember I was laying, one friend of mine who worked with me was laying on this side, one on this side. They both were burning up with typhus, with fever. I was in the middle. We slept all naked. They both survived, I mean, the sickness, and I didn't catch it.
So by being in quarantine.
Yes, this saved me. This saved me.
And when they lifted the quarantine?
When they lifted quarantine, we went out. This was already a picture of a different color. We went out to work. They were not strict. And I overheard two assessmen. They were standing next to where I was working. And they were speaking. And one said to the other, I wonder who is going to invade us here, who's going to come here first, the Americans or the Russians? Because we didn't know anything.
And this is March of
And this was March
1945.
of 1945. So they were standing and talking to one another, and they were saying, I don't know who is going to come here, the Russians or the Americans. So then I found out already what's going on. And I saw they let a little bit down the strictness, you know. They became a little bit more lax, the SS. So they knew that the end is coming.
Do you remember any of the names of any of the guards in
No.
the camp?
No.
Did you have any personal dealings?
I had once, it's a funny thing that you asked me. This was before I got sick. I was working in a place, and there was this man. He was not SS. He was from the Wehrmacht, which is a conscript. And he was going up and down and up and down and up and down, and under his breath he was swearing and swearing and swearing and swearing. I didn't know what was going on. So I looked up to him. We made eye contact. And I went back to work. He's swearing again. I pick up my head. We make eye contact. Comes over to me. He asks me where I'm from. So I said where I'm from. Why are you in camp? I said, because I'm Jewish. I said to him, where are you from? He said, told me. He's married, he has children. How come you wound up here? I asked him. He said he was on the Eastern Front. And he was shot in the pancreas. And he cannot eat the bread, the soldier bread, the dark bread. And the white bread, he said, for the big brass. And I suffer, and I was fighting for Germany, and they don't give me what I need. He said to me this. He starts swearing in German, and I don't say a word. Okay. Next day, he comes to me, brings me a container with a package of razor blades. This was the weight of gold in a camp, razor blades. Okay, I thanked him. The next day, he brings me a half a bread because he couldn't eat the bread. And it developed a rapport between the two of us. And then I lost contact because this was cut off the quarantine. But this was the only contact that I had with a German in the camp.
You had mentioned that at one time you, in Auschwitz, you painted, you
Yes.
drew a little picture. In any other camp, did your
No.
talent ever,
No.
could you?
No. No. No.
So, how long did you stay?
Where?
This was in March of '45.
Yes.
What happened?
Then there was, by the end, this was March, by the middle of April, the camp was liquidated. So we embarked on a death march. We were escorted, of course, with dogs and all the paraphernalia by the SS, to Dachau. We spent about 3 days in Dachau, and then we went by foot.
How many men were there?
Oh, there was a column of men, a whole column of men. There were Russians, there were Yugoslavians, there were Jews, there were a whole mixture of nationalities. They were going on for miles. And we went from Dachau. From Dachau we went to south of Munich in a place which is called Waldkirchen, which is south of Bad Tölz. And over there, by May the 2nd, we had 2 weeks walking, sleeping in the open, on snow and on rain. We were exhausted, wet, and hungry and dirty.
You mentioned before about your foot covering. On this march, were you wearing shoes? How were you dressed? What were you fed?
We have had almost nothing. We ate snow. I ate grass. Would you believe it? Grass I ate. And we were 2 weeks on the way. I remember one day, one incident that we were walking in the column, and comes a German on a motorbike, a motorcycle, and he says, the Americans, sorry, I go into German, the Americans are 2 miles away. They turned us around over a bridge. The bridge was detonated after we went, and we kept going a different direction. In May the 2nd, 1945, the Americans caught us. We got up in the morning. There was no sign of sentry, nothing. And we got up in the morning, and we had nowhere to go. Where were we going? No sentry, no nothing. We were more secure with the sentry, like without a sentry, you know. So I said, I had a few friends from the same city I come from. I says, let's go back. We passed a nice little town. I go back in that nice little town. We see on the church steeple white flags. White flags from different houses. So we knew already that this must be the end. Right away we went into a German house and we said we were hungry. They gave us to eat because out of fear. So about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Americans came into the city, into town. And from then on, we had everything. Chocolate, they used to throw K rations at us. They took shoes. They saw somebody in a shoe, took a pair of shoes from the tank. And from then on, as a matter of fact, a lot of people died because they were not used to all of a sudden to eat, and they ate, and a lot of them died.
Do you remember what division of the American Army?
I have no idea. No idea.
When
you know something? I'll tell you, we were like drunk. Euphoria, you know? You have no idea. It's just like you're reborn. because you come from the depth of death, all of a sudden you're living again. And another thing is very, very traumatic. I remember I was standing and realized, and I said, now you are liberated. You are the only one in this world. You have nobody. Because I received notice that my father died. I didn't know.
How did you receive notice that your father died?
Because a friend of mine who was in my father's camp was sent over to mine, where I was. And he said that he saw my father's shoes. When they selected the shoes, he saw his shoes. He assumed that he died. So I figured, okay. So I figured, with all the euphoria going on, you know, I said to myself, now you are liberated, but you're the only one in this world. You have nobody, because that's it. And this was a downside. It was a very, very traumatic experience.
What did you do next after the Americans liberated you?
Well, the Americans liberated us. We stayed a little while there. Then they took us with trucks to Munich. I stayed in Munich for quite a few weeks. Then they interchanged lists from different camps.
Were you in a DP camp in Munich?
Yeah, DP camp, yeah.
Do you remember the name?
Yeah, it was called Flakkazerne. Flakkazerne, F-L-A-C-K, Kaserne. This was barracks from barracks from soldiers, German soldiers, that they gave over this to us as a camp.
And what happened?
Freimann, you know Freimann in Munich? You said you were in Munich. Freimann Flakkazerne. This is an outskirt of Munich. As a matter of fact, I remember that when we went to camp, we were the trolley car was the last stop in the trolley car. I turned around and went back. It was the outskirts of Munich.
And what happened in the DP camp?
In DP camp, the life was easy because we had food. We were supervised by the American government, the military government, and they exchanged. There was a chaplain for the Jewish people there, and they exchanged lists from different camps. And I found out that my father is living, and he is in Dachau. I picked myself up and went to Dachau. I couldn't find him. Later I found out that he was in a military hospital because he was sick, and they brought him back relatively to better health. And then he was transported into a DP camp, which is about 2 miles away from me, the SS Kaserne, also in the outskirts of Munich, the same place. I went over to him, I brought it over to me, and I nursed him back to health.
Tell me about the time when you first saw your father after the war.
He was very sick. He was very weak, very weak. And I cannot describe to you when I saw him, because I adored my father. I worshipped him because he was a very, very good man. And we nursed him back to health. And then from there we went to Feldafing, if you know where it is. It's outside of Munich. And then I found there my wife. And from there, we spent a few months there. Then we went to Schwandorf, which is eastern by Regensburg, eastern Bavaria. And we lived there until 1949. 1949, I came to this country.
And what did you do in those? Did you work?
Yeah. I had my own place in Schwandorf. I was making men's clothing to order, private customers, and that's where I made a living.
And what about your wife?
My wife didn't have to work. In 1947, she gave birth to my daughter.
What's her name?
Rachel, after my mother.
Now, were there other survivors in this town?
Oh yeah. This was not a DP camp. This was, we're living privately. There were other survivors.
And did you speak about your experiences with
Oh, yeah.
one another?
Oh, yeah. There were survivors from different parts of Poland, but we exchanged stories, just like naturally. Even today, the people exchange stories, which is...
And how did you decide to come to the United States?
How did I decide to come to the United States? My father had a cousin here in the United States, and he started corresponding with her. She was living in Patterson. And she suggested if we want to come. And to tell you the truth, my wish was always to come to the United States. So I wanted to get away from Europe. As a matter of fact, I remember I was standing on a ship in Bremen, and I had my two-year-old girl on my hands, and I said to my wife as the ship started moving, I said, on my own volition, those shores I will never see again.
And did you ever?
Never. Never went back. I have no desire.
When you first arrived in the United States, tell me your feelings.
I was elated. Tell you why. Because to me it was completely bewildering that comes an alien into a country, he gets a document and he says, you can go wherever you want from one shore to the other and do whatever you want as long as you don't break the law. You know, to me it was unbelievable, because I can remember in Poland that being born in Poland, I had on my document that I am Jewish. You know? This was, you were branded. Just like I said before, I think I told you that if a Pole had an argument with a Jew, and he in the Pole said that he insulted the Polish nation, the Jew on hearsay was convicted. Just like was the difference. He was not considered Polish, although his forefathers were born in Poland, but he was considered Jewish, something different. So he insulted the Polish nation. In other words, they gave you to understand that you don't belong to the Polish nation.
So when you arrived in the United States, you then had this freedom.
Yeah.
What did you arrive with?
With what?
You arrived with...
With nothing. With nothing. Nothing at all. I arrived with only a, it's funny, a sewing machine. I transported a sewing machine from Germany over here. I was not smart enough to know that you can buy it here cheaper than, okay.
And did you have money?
No. No money.
So when you arrived...
I arrived penniless. I arrived here, as a matter of fact, my father arrived before me, because my papers got lost and this and that, and he arrived before me. I have to tell you another story. This goes before that. I wanted to leave Germany, and there was a commission from Canada. They were looking for tailors. So I qualified. I made the examination, and I went before the consulate. I was already before the consulate. And my child was about a year old. And the consul said, who is this man? My father was sitting next to us. So I said, this is my father. So he asked, who is the tailor? I said, I am the tailor. So he said, he cannot go. You go first. And after that, you can bring him over. I said, no, I don't want to go. And I refused then and there on the spot. I said, no, I'm not going. I got up and walked out. So when we applied to come to the United States, my father came before me because our papers got lost. I said to my father, you go first. I'm going to follow you. So that's what it was. And my father wrote me a letter that all the family is going to chip in, the chipping in to when you come, you're going to have an apartment, you're going to have furniture, and this. I said to my father, write down every little penny that anybody is contributing. because when I come back and I'm going to start working, I want to return everybody the money that they laid out. And that's what I did.
Were you ever given any money by any Jewish organizations?
No, sir. No, ma'am.
Were you offered it?
No. I didn't look for it. Because when I came, I remember I came Thursday, and Monday I went to work.
Where were you living?
In Patterson, New Jersey.
Tell me about your life from then.
Well, I started out as a sewing machine operator. In 1948, 1948. I came 1947, 1947, 1949, rather 1949. I came, I made $1 an hour. And I started advancing more and more and more until I became a foreman, and then I became a manager of a big shop of 200 people.
Did you ever get in touch with any Holocaust groups after?
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, I am now, for the past 10 years, I am recording secretary of the Holocaust Survivors Federation of South Florida. And I'm very active.
In your daily life, do you think about the Holocaust often?
I'm not absorbed with it. The only time that I get a little bit humility is when I see on television a picture about like Schindler's List or a documentary. Then I think about it. But otherwise, it doesn't occupy my thoughts mostly, because I don't think you have to remember the past, but you don't have to live in the past.
Did you had another child besides your daughter?
Yes, he was born in this country in 1952.
And his name?
Norman.
Did you speak to your children growing up about your experiences?
No, my son is more receptive to it, but my daughter isn't, because she gets too emotional. As a matter of fact, my father did not remarry. He lived with us for 17 years. He came to us together with, when we came, we moved in together, my father and my family, and he practically raised my kids.
And when did your father pass away?
He passed away the last day of December 1962.
Now that it's 50 years since the Holocaust, what message do you have for future generations about your experiences or what you learned?
Well, I personally don't consider myself a victim. Maybe I considered myself a victim when I was in concentration camp. But I don't consider myself a victim only because, for the one simple reason, that I lived to see the fall of the Third Reich. And I witnessed the downfall of the German might and Hitler's demise. And I would like to think that I came out a better man, for more understanding for mankind, for the sufferings of people, regardless of race, creed, or color. And I have more love for humanity than I maybe had before.
And is that the message that you'd
Yes.
like to leave to future
Yes.
generations?
Most important is understanding for one another, intolerance.
Mr. Feld, why do you think that you survived and so many others didn't?
Maybe I was in the right place in the right time. Maybe I was stronger than others. And again, if you throw in a net, you don't catch all the fish. but I don't ascribe it to a higher power. Because if I would be callous to those millions and the 1.5 million children who died in such an unspeakable way.
Do you think that a lot of it had to do with luck or just circumstantial?
It depends on the definition of luck. If you, I might say luck, but I don't believe in predestination.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to your testimonial that we missed?
Well, the only thing what I didn't speak enough about the discrimination of Jews in Poland. You see, Jews were invited en masse to Poland by the end of the 14th and the beginning of the 15th century by Casimir the Great. Jews have made a big contribution to Poland. They initiated commerce in those days, and we were looked upon as persona non grata all the time. Like, I don't remember whether I mentioned this before, that Jews had to sit on separate benches in the universities. You had to be brilliant to get into. You couldn't hold a government job. You couldn't be a commissioned officer in the army. You couldn't serve in the Air Force or in the Navy. And you were discriminated not only from the grassroots, but also from the government. And the government tried to embrace the ideology of Hitler, of Nazism, and put in those laws in the Polish constitution or whatever. And it's a funny thing. I once said to a Polish person I had a discussion with that all my life I was a Jew living in Poland. And when I came to America, I became a Polak. Why? Because on all my documents it says Polish.
I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to give us your testimonial.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Feld, would you like to introduce your family?
Yes, this is my wife Esther, this is my daughter Rachel, and this is my son Norman.
And do you want to say anything to your children or to your husband?
I don't know what to say.
So don't say nothing.
I'm happy that the kids made the time to come
Okay.
and to be with us, involved in it a little bit. And this is it.
And we try to instill in them the values of our people.
And you are also a survivor?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
This is a picture of me, a student, at the public school in Lodz, school number 114, 5th grade. It was taken on the year of 1931. This is the picture of my brother, Shlomo. This was done in 1937 at the age of 16. He was killed in a concentration camp in Poland, Poznań. This picture was taken in 1947 in Germany. This is a picture of my father, my wife, myself, and my daughter when she was 3 months old. My daughter Rachel. Feld.
What was your wife's name?
My wife Esther, my father Moses, myself. This is my name Esther Feld. myself, Alan Feld. This was taken in 1946 in Germany.
What was the occasion of this photograph?
This is the house where I lived before the war and during the war in the ghetto. This is Lodge. The street is Limanowskiego, 24. It was taken by a friend of mine in 1994. He went for a trip. He brought me back the picture. This is my father, Moses. This is where he worked after he came to the United States. This was taken in 1950. This is my son Norman and my daughter Rachel. This was taken 3 years ago. This is my granddaughter Lee, my daughter's daughter, and she is in Tucson, Arizona, and this was taken 2 years ago. This is an example of my artwork. I did it a couple of years ago.